She walked away without a single word, and he never understood why. 3 years of what he thought was perfect connection dissolved in a moment of silence more devastating than any argument. He replayed that evening 1,000 times in his mind, searching for the catastrophic event, the unforgivable betrayal. But there was none, just a sentence. 7 words that seemed harmless to him, innocent even, spoken over dinner in the Italian restaurant where they used to celebrate their monthly anniversaries. 7 words that detonated something irreversible in her eyes. The fork stopped midway to her mouth, her gaze shifted from warmth to something he'd never seen before, a kind of recognition, as if she'd just understood something fundamental about him that invalidated everything that came before. She finished her meal in polite silence, smiled through dessert, kissed him goodnight with lips that felt like they were saying goodbye, and 3 days later, her things were gone from his apartment. No explanation, no dramatic confrontation, just absence. This happens more often than you think, and it's not about being a bad person or making obvious mistakes. The most dangerous words aren't insults or confessions of infidelity. They're the seemingly innocent phrases that reveal something deeper. Something Niccolo Machiavelli understood 5 centuries ago when he wrote about power, perception, and the fatal gap between intention and impact. Machiavelli never wrote a dating guide, but his insights into human nature, specifically about how people perceive weakness, how they respond to certain displays of character, and how perception shapes reality, are devastatingly applicable to modern relationships. He understood that power dynamics aren't just about politics or war. They're woven into every human interaction, especially the most intimate ones. What most men fail to grasp is that women are constantly reading subtext, constantly evaluating not just what you say, but what those words reveal about your character, your strength, your understanding of social dynamics. Machiavelli wrote that it's better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both. But he also understood something more nuanced, that respect is built on perception, and perception is built on calculated presentation. The moment you reveal certain weaknesses, certain misunderstandings about power and value, you fundamentally alter how you're perceived. And unlike in Renaissance politics, where you might recover through strategic maneuvering, in romantic relationships, some revelations are irreversible. They change the chemistry. They kill attraction at a level so deep that no amount of flowers, apologies, or changed behavior can resurrect it. The man in that restaurant, the one who lost 3 years in 7 words, he wasn't cruel. He wasn't unfaithful. He simply revealed something about himself that made her see him differently. And once that perception shifted, once she saw weakness where she's seen strength, uncertainty where she's seen confidence, need where she's seen want, the attraction evaporated like morning fog under harsh sunlight. Machiavelli would recognize this dynamic instantly. He wrote extensively about how leaders lose power not through single catastrophic decisions, but through small revelations that erode the perception of their capability. The prince who appears desperate loses his authority. The man who appears desperate loses his magnetism. Same mechanism, different arena. Understanding what never to say to a woman isn't about manipulation or playing games. It's about understanding the deep psychological mechanisms that govern attraction, respect, and long-term connection. It's about recognizing that some statements, regardless of your intention, trigger evolutionary responses, psychological patterns, and social conditioning that work against you at a fundamental level. Machiavelli's genius was recognizing that human nature follows predictable patterns, and those who understand these patterns can navigate them effectively, while those who remain ignorant become victims of them. Tonight, we're going to explore 5 fatal phrases, 5 conversational landmines that seem harmless on the surface, but carry explosive potential beneath. These aren't obvious insults or crude mistakes. They're the sophisticated errors that intelligent, well-meaning men make constantly, destroying attraction without understanding what went wrong. Each one reveals something about you that undermines your position, diminishes your value, or exposes a fundamental misunderstanding about power dynamics. And once said, they cannot be unsaid. Machiavelli understood dependency as the ultimate vulnerability. In The Prince, he warns against relying on others for your security, your happiness, your fundamental stability. The moment you need someone, you give them complete power over you. And while this might sound romantic in theory, in practice, it destroys the very foundation of attraction. When you tell a woman you need her, you're not expressing love. You're expressing weakness. You're revealing that your emotional stability, your happiness, your sense of completeness depends on her presence. And this creates an impossible burden. Women are biologically and psychologically wired to seek partners who represent strength, stability, and security. This isn't about outdated gender roles or political incorrectness. It's about deep evolutionary programming that exists whether we acknowledge it or not. A man who needs a woman for his emotional completeness appears as a dependent, not a partner. He appears as another responsibility, another thing to manage, rather than someone who enhances her life through his strength. The distinction between wanting and needing is everything. Wanting suggests choice, desire, appreciation. Needing suggests desperation, incompleteness, fragility. Consider the Machiavellian prince who makes his rule dependent on the goodwill of others. He becomes vulnerable to their whims, their changing moods, their evolving interests. He's no longer sovereign, he's a puppet. The same dynamic applies in relationships. The moment your happiness becomes contingent on her presence, her approval, her emotional availability, you stop being an attractive partner and become an emotional dependent. She can feel this shift instantly, even if you don't articulate it explicitly. It changes how she responds to you, how she perceives disagreements, how she experiences the relationship itself. What makes this particularly insidious is that men often believe they're being vulnerable and emotionally open, qualities they've been told women want. And yes, women do value emotional availability. But there's a crucial difference between sharing emotions from a position of strength and revealing emotional dependency from a position of weakness. Sharing that you miss her, that you value her presence, that she adds joy to her life. These come from abundance. Telling her you need her, that you can't function without her, that she is responsible for your happiness. These come from scarcity. Women can distinguish between these instantly, even if they can't always articulate why one feels attractive and the other repulsive. Machiavelli would advise maintaining your sovereign emotional state, being someone whose life is enhanced by her presence but not dependent on it. This isn't about being cold or distant, it's about being genuinely complete as an individual, making the relationship a choice rather than a necessity. The prince who rules from strength, who has his own resources, his own stability, his own foundation, that prince can form alliances without becoming vulnerable. The man who approaches relationships the same way, who brings his own completeness to the table, that man remains attractive across decades. Disagreements in relationships are inevitable. How you handle them determines whether respect grows or deteriorates. Machiavelli wrote extensively about the danger of appearing weak in conflicts, even small ones. The prince who constantly concedes, who always backs down, who habitually admits fault regardless of the situation, that prince loses the respect of his people. They might like him, might find him agreeable, but they don't respect him. And without respect, there's no authority. In relationships, without respect, there's no sustained attraction. When you immediately capitulate in disagreements, when you reflexively admit fault to avoid conflict, when you consistently prioritize peace over truth, you're not being mature or evolved. You're revealing that you value her approval more than you value your own perception of reality. This is attractive to absolutely no one. It signals that you're more concerned with being liked than with being right, that you rather avoid discomfort than stand by your perspective, that your frame is so weak it collapses at the slightest pressure. Women test this constantly, often unconsciously. They'll take positions in arguments, push back on your decisions, challenge your perspective, not necessarily because they believe they're right, but because they're testing whether you have a solid frame, whether you can hold your ground under pressure, whether you're someone who knows what he believes and stands by it. When you immediately fold, when you rush to agree just to end the conflict, you fail the test catastrophically. You reveal that your opinions are negotiable, that your frame is malleable, that you're more invested in the relationship than your own integrity. This doesn't mean being stubborn or refusing to admit genuine mistakes. Machiavelli was pragmatic, not rigid. When you're clearly wrong about a fact, admit it cleanly and move forward. But there's a difference between acknowledging a factual error and surrendering your entire position at the first sign of disagreement. There's a difference between considering her perspective and automatically deferring to it. The man who thoughtfully considers her viewpoint, acknowledges valid points, but maintains his position when he genuinely believes he's right, that man demonstrates the kind of mental strength that sustains attraction. Watch how she responds when you stand your ground respectfully. Often, the disagreement itself becomes less important than the fact that you had the backbone to maintain your position. She might continue arguing in the moment, but afterward, there's often a subtle increase in respect, a recognition that you're not someone who can be easily swayed or manipulated. Machiavelli understood that people want leaders who have conviction, who believe in something strongly enough to defend it. Women want partners who have that same quality, who aren't so desperate for approval that they'll abandon their own perspective at the first hint of conflict. Machiavelli's prince is decisive. He gathers information, considers options, then acts with conviction. What he never does is constantly defer decisions to others, constantly seek approval before taking action, constantly appear uncertain about basic choices. The prince who governs by committee, who needs consensus for every decision, who appears paralyzed by options, that prince appears weak, and weakness in a leader, whether political or romantic, erodes respect. When you constantly ask a woman what you should do, especially regarding decisions that should be within your domain, you're not being considerate or inclusive. You're revealing decision paralysis. You're showing that you lack the confidence or competence to make choices independently. And while she might enjoy being consulted on major decisions that affect both of you, she doesn't want to be your mother, your manager, or your decision-making crutch for life's basic navigation. This manifests in countless small ways that accumulate into a pattern. Where should we eat? What should I wear? Should I take this job? How should I handle this situation with my friend? What do you think I should do about my boss? Individually, these questions seem harmless, even considerate. But when they form a pattern, when you're consistently looking to her for direction rather than presenting decisions and inviting her input, you shift from partner to dependent. You shift from masculine polarity to neutrality, or even role reversal. The Machiavellian approach is to make thoughtful decisions, present them with confidence, and remain open to input without being dependent on approval. I'm thinking we should try that new Thai place tonight, unless you have somewhere specific in mind. This is decisiveness with flexibility. What do you think we should eat? This is abdication. The difference seems subtle, but the psychological impact is enormous. One positions you as someone who takes initiative and leads. The other positions you as someone who needs direction and follows. Women respect men who can navigate the world competently, who can make decisions under uncertainty, who can take responsibility for outcomes. This doesn't mean being authoritarian or dismissive of her input. It means having the spine to form opinions, make choices, and stand by them. Machiavelli noted that people respect leaders who appear certain even when outcomes are uncertain. They lose respect for leaders who appear uncertain even when outcomes are guaranteed. The same principle applies in intimate relationships. Decisiveness, even with imperfect information, is more attractive than constant consultation born from fear of making the wrong choice. Machiavelli understood negotiations and power dynamics with surgical precision. The moment you signal that you'll do anything for someone, you eliminate all your leverage. You announce that your boundaries are non-existent, that your self-respect is negotiable, that you value the relationship more than you value yourself. This might sound romantic in movies, but in real relationship dynamics, it's catastrophic. When you tell a woman you'd do anything for her, you're not expressing love. You're expressing desperation and lack of self-worth. You're telling her that you have no standards, no boundaries, no line you won't cross for her approval. And while this might seem like ultimate devotion, it actually triggers deep discomfort and disrespect. She might not be able to articulate why it feels wrong, but it does. Because you're essentially saying your needs, your values, your integrity are all subordinate to gaining or maintaining her affection. This creates several problems simultaneously. First, it removes all mystery and challenge from the relationship. If you do anything, there's nothing to wonder about, nothing to work for, no sense that your commitment is special or earned. Second, it places enormous pressure on her. She becomes responsible for someone who has no self-governance, no internal compass beyond pleasing her. Third, and most importantly, it reveals that you don't value yourself. And if you don't value yourself, why should she? Machiavelli advised princes to be generous, but never to the point of being taken for granted, to show strength, but maintain some reserve, to be reliable but unpredictable enough that people don't assume they can manipulate you. The same applies in relationships. You should be generous with your time, attention, and affection, but not to the point where it becomes expected, unlimited, and therefore valueless. There should be a sense that while you're invested in the relationship, you have boundaries, standards, and a life beyond her that you won't completely abandon. The attractive position is being someone who chooses to be with her, who treats her well because you value her, but who clearly has enough self-respect that if the relationship became toxic or one-sided, you'd walk away. This isn't about making threats or playing games. It's about genuinely having standards and boundaries. The man who would do anything for a woman signals he has no standards. The man who treats her well while maintaining his dignity signals he has chosen her from a position of strength, not desperation. Only one of these positions sustains long-term attraction and respect. Perhaps the most insidious phrase on this list, because it masquerades as humility or appreciation. Machiavelli understood that how you present yourself shapes how others perceive you. The prince who constantly diminishes himself, who suggests he's unworthy of his position, who appears shocked that he's been given authority, that prince invites others to question his legitimacy. He plants the seeds of his own downfall. When you tell a woman she's too good for you, you're not being humble or complimentary. You're asking her to agree with you, to recognize that you're beneath her, to question why she's with someone who is, by his own admission, inadequate. You're undermining the entire foundation of the relationship by suggesting it's based on her poor judgment or temporary blindness to your inferiority. This is relationship poison disguised as a compliment. Women want to be with men they respect, men they admire, men who bring value to their lives. When you suggest you're not good enough for her, you force her to either disagree and convince you of your worth, which is exhausting emotional labor, or to start questioning whether you might be right, which kills attraction. Neither outcome serves the relationship. You've created a lose-lose scenario where she either becomes your therapist, constantly reassuring you of your value, or she starts genuinely wondering why she's with someone who doesn't even value himself. This often comes from insecurity disguised as modesty. The man who feels inadequate thinks that by acknowledging it first, he's being honest, or preventing her from discovering it later. But Machiavelli would recognize this as strategic incompetence. You're not preventing anything. You're creating the very doubt you fear. You're turning her attention to your inadequacies rather than your strengths. You're teaching her to see you through the lens of your insecurities rather than your capabilities. The Machiavellian approach is to recognize your value without arrogance, to acknowledge her value without self-diminishment, and to present the relationship as a partnership of equals who enhance each other's lives. I'm glad we found each other is confident and mutual. You're too good for me is self-sabotage. You should absolutely appreciate her and express that appreciation, but from a position of recognizing that you also bring value, that the relationship works because you're both valuable people who've chosen each other. Anything less than this invites her to eventually agree with your low self-assessment. That man in the restaurant, the one who lost everything in 7 words, he said, "I need you so much, I'd be nothing without you." He thought he was expressing love. She heard emotional dependency and lack of self-worth. Everything Machiavelli warned against in a single sentence. The relationship didn't end that night, but it ended in that moment. The rest was just the slow death march toward the inevitable conclusion. These 5 phrases aren't just communication errors. They're fundamental violations of the psychological principles that govern attraction and respect. Machiavelli understood that power, whether political or personal, rests on perception. How people perceive your strength, your decisiveness, your self-worth, your boundaries. These perceptions shape how they respond to you at the deepest levels. In politics, these perceptions determine whether you maintain authority. In relationships, they determine whether you maintain attraction. The tragedy is that most men make these mistakes from good intentions. They think they're being vulnerable, considerate, humble, loving. And they are, in a sense, but they're doing it from positions of weakness rather than strength, scarcity rather than abundance, fear rather than confidence. And the female psyche, shaped by millions of years of evolution and layers of social conditioning, responds to these signals in predictable ways. Not because women are shallow or manipulative, but because attraction operates on mechanisms deeper than conscious choice. This isn't about becoming cold or manipulative yourself. It's about understanding that genuine strength, genuine confidence, genuine self-respect, these are the foundations of sustained attraction. Machiavelli's insights weren't about being cruel or dishonest. They were about understanding human nature as it is, not as we wish it were, and navigating it effectively. The same applies here. Understand the psychology, adjust your communication, maintain your dignity and self-worth, and watch how relationships transform from anxious negotiations into genuine partnerships built on mutual respect. The next time you're about to speak, especially in moments of vulnerability or conflict or deep emotion, pause. Consider not just what you're trying to express, but what your words reveal about your self-perception, your boundaries, your understanding of the relationship dynamic. Ask yourself whether you're speaking from strength or weakness, abundance or scarcity, confidence or fear. The difference between those positions is often the difference between words that deepen connection and words that kill it. If this video shifted something in your understanding of relationship dynamics, if it made you recognize mistakes you've been making or gave you clarity on interactions that previously confused you, then this content is exactly what you need more of in your life. Hit that subscribe button right now because we're just getting started. Every week, I break down the psychological principles that most men never learn, the Machiavellian insights that separate men who struggle in relationships from men who thrive in them, the uncomfortable truths about attraction that political correctness has buried but that continue operating whether we acknowledge them or not. Leave a comment below sharing which of these 5 phrases hit closest to home for you, or if you've witnessed these dynamics play out in your own relationships. Your experience helps other men recognize these patterns in their own lives. And if you know a man who's struggling in relationships, who's confused about why his good intentions aren't producing good results, share this video with him. Sometimes the most valuable thing you can do for someone is give them the truth they're not getting anywhere else. Check out the videos appearing on your screen right now. One explores the Machiavellian principles of maintaining attraction in long-term relationships. The other breaks down the psychology of why nice guys finish last and what to do about it. Both will give you additional frameworks for understanding these dynamics at deeper levels. This isn't just about avoiding 5 phrases. It's about fundamentally understanding the psychological mechanisms that govern human connection and positioning yourself to navigate them successfully. Now go, apply what you've learned, and I'll see you in the next video.